We want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a special podcast this week. We're taking a little bit of a break from our Philippians series, and we had our Mission Sunday this past Sunday. And so I'm excited to have two of the missionaries that were here that spoke for the weekend, Steve and Christy, and they have a lot of experience in missions, and we'll get into a little bit of that and just their story and what God is leading them to next. And so thank you, Steve and Christy, for joining us, and we want to welcome you today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, how today's early still, but how is it for a Monday morning? Because that's when we're recording.
Beautiful.
It's sunny and cool.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Beautiful
nice
fall
morning.
day.
Yeah, and so we have, and I know people with wells, this has not been the best fall for them, which growing up on a well, like I get that tension, but man, it's been a really beautiful fall.
We have a well, and it's doing great. So.
Okay, it is?
Yeah,
Good,
we've had no
good.
issues.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I heard someone else at the church here today saying like, oh man, we're in need of some rain and some snow this winter. So
Well, we have a
it made me
spring
think
under
of
our
it.
house.
Oh,
We have a
okay.
spring, so we never run out of water.
So you guys are
Yeah.
in a good
We're
spot.
always
We're in
good.
good
Yeah.
shape with water.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
pressure
that's-
wash the house and still don't run out
And
of water.
still, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
We might have a little too much water on
Yeah.
our property, according to our basement sometimes.
Oh man, pressure washing the house. That is something that needs done at my house, and I just haven't got to. And it's not a water issue. It's me taking the time to
Time.
do it
Yeah,
issue.
it's not fun, though. It's
Yeah,
not very fun.
Yeah, but it's something that's nice to do,
Yeah.
and it's good. Well, you guys, it was great because there's some connections with you guys in the Federated Church, but we've not. This is the first time that we've had you in as guests, missionaries. And so we're looking to, prayerfully consider partnering with you guys moving forward. But speak a little bit to the connections that you have here at the Fed.
All right.
Yeah, for me, it's, I grew up in Erie, so I've known about your church for a number of years. And in recent years, well, not so recent, because my brother and sister-in-law have attended here for quite a number of years.
Yeah.
So Dave and Kim Wurst. Dave is my oldest brother, and my sister-in-law and their children, my nephews and my niece. And my father, Dave Wurst, and his wife, Carol, attend here as well.
Yeah.
And so have family connection. Then in 2019, I was asked by Kelly if I would be the women's conference speaker at WLD Ranch that fall. I think that was the October of 2019.
Yeah.
And out of that, I just developed some new and wonderful friendships with some of the women here in your church. So it's been a growing and developing friendship. Anytime I see Kelly, for example, at the cakery, she's so kind, and she tells me about things she's praying about in our prayer letters, and I know she's been a real prayer warrior for us. So, and I know that Pastor Ed ministers to my dad.
Yes.
He's now at home a lot of the time. He's nearing age 90, and so
Yeah.
they spend time together doing a Bible study. And so this church has just been a wonderful blessing to my family in many ways.
Yeah. Your dad and Carol have hosted my wife and kids and I a couple times early on when he was feeling a little better, and still getting to church here a little bit, because it'll be 4 years in December that I've been back. And so it was always great. I also, because, not to throw your brother under the bus, but because he was in the woods yesterday and not here, I was going to jump on an opportunity after you guys spoke to say, now she wants everyone to know that she's Dave's much younger sister.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly.
But I'm not going to say that. And Kim and Carol were sitting there and make Kim look like she's older. So
Now you're saying it on the podcast.
Yeah, so I'm saying it here. But I would have loved the opportunity to get, get just a little bit of a joke with your brother Dave.
Yeah.
Just what a great family. And so long that they've been here and been involved, and just the ripple effect of his impact with the outdoor expo. I always want to call it the game dinner, because it was the game dinner for so long, but now it has to be an outdoor expo legally, and he and Boots Merritt and been the spearheads for that, and just the thousands of individuals that have come and heard the gospel over the years that don't darken the door of a church otherwise.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And just a great ministry.
Yeah, Dave is a good example of someone who uses talents and gifts that he has, and interests and passions of his, to channel them in ways to interact with people, to talk about spiritual things too.
Absolutely.
So his woodworking skills and talent, he uses that way to bless others too. So we were raised that way. A lot of people don't know that we're a large family. There's 6 of us kids with that 15-year span. And we were raised in the church, and my parents, my mom and dad, were very hospitable, and our mom died, and when Dad married Carol, she is the same way. She has a heart for Jesus, and they are just such hospitable and generous people. And we were raised that way, and it comes out in various ways in each of our lives. Yeah. So, I've loved being part of that and being raised with that kind of heart.
Yeah. And your dad has always, your dad and my parents have always had a great relationship. And one of the things that we used to laugh about it, your dad would take out all of the leadership and staff to a Christmas dinner for years. And my mom would always appreciate it. She goes, "Food's our love language too," like that's it. So, but they would always, stay connected, and it's neat, the connection you guys have here, and just the long time impact of your family on this church, which is great. Now, your family, your immediate family, like how many kids do you guys have, for those that don't know you, and even the grandkid aspect? Yeah. And so let us know a little bit about your family.
We have 3 kids, so they're all grown. They're all in their mid to later 20s now, 2 boys and a girl. They all live down south, North Carolina and Georgia, so not close by.
Yeah.
Both boys, the oldest 2, are married.
Okay.
And between them have 5 kids. So we have 5 grandkids.
Nice.
The girl is the oldest. The granddaughter's the oldest
Okay.
at 6 years old. And then 4 boys.
Okay.
Yeah, between the 2 of them.
It's the best gig in the world.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's parenting is amazing.
Yeah.
And as you know, that my wife and I have a 2nd and 5th grader, so they're 7 and about to be 11 this Friday. Our son turns 11. Oh. So it's an amazing thing. But whenever I talk to grandparents, they're like, not that bad, that's it's a different.
It is.
It's a different thing.
Completely different.
Yes, you can always. I mean, unless you're having sleepovers, you can always send them home to mom and dad at night.
That's right.
do
Even on a sleepover, you could probably do
I
that.
know. If things get out of hand. So I'm sure you guys enjoy every time that you get to see them.
Yeah,
we do.
It's not often enough, but we'll be down there for Thanksgiving to see them all.
Good.
Yeah.
And they're coming here for Christmas. So.
Yeah. So are they in a part of North Carolina that they were safe through all the hurricane, or?
Yeah, our son is in Raleigh, so they were safe. Our kids in Georgia got a lot of rain, lots of trees down, but no damage.
They were out of power for about 55 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
But no significant damage to their homes, which was really good news.
That was the first hurricane.
Yeah. I was to say, I know that. So we went to Asheville for a family vacation when it was just the 3 of us, and I think Angie was like 6 months pregnant with Emery, or 5 months pregnant with Emery. And where we were there, she's like, my memory is not as good as hers in some areas. She's like, "Do you remember this pair of shoes I bought on vacation?" I guess I remember that you have this pair of shoes. She's like, "Do you remember the small shop on this street?" Not really. And then she showed me the street, and it was just gone.
Oh, no.
And then she's like, "Remember the lake that we were swimming in at the resort we were at?" I was like, "Yeah." And then she showed me that lake, and it was just, that was where everything whirlpooled.
Oh, my.
And like, it was just, they were talking, it's going to be quite a while before they get cleaned up. And it was just like, man, to see some of that devastation, it was a different view because I'd been there.
Yep.
And just, it's crazy.
Yeah.
To see
really
that.
Devastating.
Yeah. Whole roads washed out, including interstates, I-40 and I-26 parts of them, and major bridges.
Yes.
And it's just remarkable and unspeakable, some of the damage and destruction there. It will take some time for them to rebuild. Yeah,
for sure. And one of my good friends happens to be my younger brother's best friend. He's down there. And he's a medic in the Army, and he's been posting a lot of pictures and asking for help. And, every free minute he has, he's been trying to help out and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
so,
Our oldest, Philip, who lives in Raleigh, he served in the U.S. Army, and he's a police officer in Raleigh. And he went with some buddies, and they spent some time in Western North Carolina with part of the relief work.
Fellow
And,
officers.
yeah.
so it's really wonderful. It's a beautiful thing to see communities rally together and support one another like that. And so I think that's the thing that's going to get them through. Government assistance will
Absolutely.
be helpful for sure, but
If it ever comes.
it's the hard.
Let's not get off on that rabbit trail.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
that's needed,
Yeah.
and hopefully it will come and be helpful. But really, it's the heart of the people, I think, in situations like that make a world of difference. Neighbors helping neighbors, and those in neighboring communities who didn't get hit as hard, they give resources and help and man hours. So
That's when you see America at its best.
That's right.
In
Yeah.
times like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's so crucial. And hopefully that continues, and hopefully the church can be the church in that.
yes,
Yeah,
Because
right.
that's another thing of our call to rally to those in need.
Yeah.
we can really shine in those situations.
And I've seen a lot of that happening so far. So hopefully
Good.
that continues to happen. Now, you guys have been full-time vocational missionaries since 2000.
Yeah.
And as you shared, and I preface this, like, you guys have been married 31 years, and so you've been missionaries for 24. So what was that call like? What was the process like of you guys being called into full-time missions? Was it a call from an early age that took some time to mature?
Yeah.
Was it like me that kind of went into full-time vocational ministry kicking and screaming like, this is not what I want, God, and I've loved it, but so I'd love to hear what that looked like for you guys.
Our stories are really different. And that's part of the cool thing
Yeah.
about how God works in our lives, right? I'm a third generation missionary.
Yeah.
Was born on the mission field. Grew up in the States after health reasons for my mom brought us back to the States. But still involved in missions. My dad was director of all of our missionaries in South America for 27 years.
What country were you born in?
Chile.
Chile. Okay. And I
Chile,
thought
yep,
that
yep.
because you talked about your grandparents and going
So
from
we
Peru
had-
to Chile. And
Yeah, exactly. So we had 3 generations that served in one town. So my grandparents, my parents, my dad's sister was there for 50 years.
Yeah.
And then my brother as well with his family.
jeez.
So
What a legacy.
Really blessed by it. But I kind of ran from it for a while.
Yeah, that's understandable.
So I always wanted to serve God, but I was just fearful of just the seriousness of it.
Yeah.
Preaching, public speaking, anything like
You
that.
saw it firsthand.
Yeah.
You knew the cost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I ran from it for a while, and it took dropping out of college. My grades were so bad, I just was directionless. I was there. My priorities at that time were to play soccer on the soccer
Yeah.
team, and so I was on academic probation every spring because I didn't study in the fall. I was there to play soccer,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
I'd have to work to get off of it in the spring
Yes.
so I could play in the fall. Literally 2.5 years of this cycle. By that time, my grades were still so bad.
Yeah.
And I was running out of money. I dropped out in the next year and a half, just searched for God's will and direction for my life. And it culminated, all of that culminated on a soccer missions trip to Eastern Europe when I was 22 years old in 1990. And it ended by going to the World Cup in Italy to watch some games. So it was
Yeah.
a Christian team that we were on. The coach I knew, because he had tried to recruit me and my brothers to Nyack College in New York, which is where we grew up. But it culminated with just such a clear call from God back to Eastern Europe to become a missionary that I re-enrolled in college that summer.
Yeah.
My grades went up.
Okay.
'cause I started studying, I was taking classes for the second and third time.
Yeah. That's,
But it was a clear call from the Lord. And then I just realized whenever I get married, I'm not going to date or marry anybody that's not going to the mission field,
okay.
because I've known too many people and heard too many stories
Yeah.
of one's called, one's not, and then one of the two is living plan B for their life and not real happy about it, whether they go to the field or whether they don't.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that.
Absolutely. And it makes me chuckle because when I went to college the first time, I got my degree, and it was American football for me. But my grades were like, I did enough to, like, if I needed a C, I got a C. I got a couple B's, an A here and there. But, like, I don't know, school just wasn't always my focus. And then I was directionless at the time. But then when God called me into education and I went back to Mercyhurst, there was a couple classes I had to take over in order for them to count. Yeah. And I remember retaking them, and I'm like, why did I struggle? Like, this is easy, but I had focus. And, like,
of course.
Like, it was one of those things of now I had an end goal.
Yep.
Instead of like, I'm taking these classes so I can play a sport, like that's,
sure.
That end goal is like, Yeah. But, it is great to have that direction. So you knew at that point, like, you went back to college, and what was your degree going to be in? Was it biblical studies?
Missiology.
Okay, missiology. And so you knew that's the route that God had for you.
Yeah.
Was mission something that God had on your heart early, late?
Yes.
Like,
Sorry. For me, it was quite early.
Yeah.
We went through a church change in my childhood. We had attended another church, and then we shifted to a different one. And when that shift happened, I just heard for the first time in our first year in that new church, the gospel presented clearly. I had grown up going to church, attending Sunday school, knowing all the Bible stories. But when we made that change, I heard for the first time how all those Bible stories made a difference in my life, what they all meant for me. I had a need for a Savior. And I was about 8 when that happened, and I knew that I had a need for a Savior.
Yeah.
And I heard a sermon one Sunday evening that just made it so clear to me. And there was an altar call, and I went forward and gave my life to Jesus. And then that church has a very strong missions emphasis. And so in our first year there, we attended a missions conference.
Yeah.
And I knew missionaries before that. And my family had been involved in a student exchange program, like a foreign student exchange program. So I was also introduced to other countries and cultures and languages. That was part of our family routine. We had 6 kids in our home, but we often had a 7th who was living with us from another country. So I had exposures to other countries and cultures and languages. But at that missions conference at that newer church we were attending, something just came alive in my heart. And I heard the missionary give a call directed specifically at the young people in the church saying, if you have Jesus in your life and you've come to know him as your Savior, would you be willing to say yes to God to go somewhere in the world where they've never had a chance to hear about Jesus and accept him as their Savior? And my heart was just pounding. I was about 9 at this time. My heart was just pounding, and I knew God was speaking to me. So again, I went forward and knelt and prayed and gave my life to the Lord in that way, that I would serve him overseas wherever he would call me. And at that time, I just felt like my call was wherever the need was the greatest, that's where I wanted to go. But I didn't have a specific call to a particular country or even place in the world. And then through various things that happened throughout the rest of my childhood and teen years, some loss and some challenges and hardship, I was discipled during that time, but hit some bumps in the road. And till I got to college and really began getting more serious about my studies and direction in life, it was really firmed up there and solidified my call to missions.
Yeah, and that is amazing. Like you said, two very different routes, and then God brought your paths together in college, and you started dating, got married.
1993.
Okay, so after college, in college?
After college,
it was right when she graduated. I graduated the year before.
Okay,
but was sticking around to work and to see where the relationship went as well. Yeah.
And so there's some space between that. You guys had a full calling. To go into missions, and I don't know this portion of your life, so like speak through time. What God had, and it doesn't have to be a ton of detail, but so often we get a call, and I'm not going to try to butcher this quote, but I've heard from, in multiple different sermons talking about if you get a call from God, there's a timing to that call. And if you try to rush it or wait too long, and that's still not like walking in obedience. And obviously Abraham is a prime example of, he had a call, he didn't trust God's timing and tried to rush it and and we get impatient as humans.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
so what did that look like? What was that preparation time that God had you guys walking through?
Yeah. Well, we knew that the whole preparation time was pretty well planned out for us with the denomination that we were a part of.
Yeah.
We knew that at least I needed a master's degree, or at least
Okay.
30 hours of graduate work.
Yeah.
We knew we needed to do at least 2 years of successful ministry in a church in the States
Okay.
before we'd be sent over. She also wanted a degree. So when we got married, we went to Asbury Seminary, and we were both going to go through. We figured it would take us 3 years, 4 years, whatever. But after a semester, we realized we don't have money for this.
Yeah.
And they're not going to send us overseas with debt.
Yeah.
Because at that time, you had to be debt-free to go overseas.
Yeah.
So we were working at a home outside of Lexington, Kentucky for abused kids.
Okay.
And decided maybe it's time we just start thinking about maybe going into ministry, and we can put off graduate school until a little after so we can get some financial stability. And without ever sending out a resume, I got 2 letters. This was before email.
Yeah. So it still came in the mail.
Got 2 letters from churches in North Carolina asking if I was interested in applying for and candidating for roles.
Okay.
There, a youth pastor position and an assistant pastor position.
That seemed to confirm to us that maybe the Lord was taking us a bit of a different direction than doing our grad work right then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't even remember if I applied ever for the second church. The first church I applied for, we candidated, and we got the job, and we moved to Raleigh, North Carolina in 1994.
Okay.
We were there for 3 years.
That's where our oldest son was born, Philip.
Okay.
And that's where now he's a police officer.
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
He went back about 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Which is funny because we moved from there when he was about 18 months old.
Yeah, so he has no
And-
recollection.
No,
It's like he was
no.
born there.
Yeah,
He-
exactly.
but he ended up back there, and when he enrolled in the Raleigh Police Academy and he graduated, they called him Philip Volstead, a native of Raleigh. We were like, what? We'll get to that part, but he grew up in Russia, actually.
yeah.
Just funny.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that's where he met his wife too. So
Okay.
So we were there 3 years. It was a hard 3 years. So we knew we might be asked to do a couple more years somewhere else, and we were okay with that because we wanted to leave encouraged. So when we left there, we went to Columbia International University
Okay.
in South Carolina.
Yeah.
And she was pregnant with our second, so she worked and put me through seminary that year.
Okay.
So
That sounds fun.
she was pregnant, and so she worked.
Yeah, I know.
She taught math, math, algebra, in a Christian school.
Okay.
Which is
And
not my education nor training,
Yeah.
but that's what we did
But
to make
I was
ends
gonna
meet.
say,
was able to do it.
To put food on the table, to
Yes.
Exactly.
I guess I'll teach
exactly.
algebra.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, man.
so we lived in married student housing in a
Yep.
trailer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That year, and had our second son, and I got my degree. And our prayer request was that by graduation, I'd been sending out resumes, had some calls, and things. And the prayer request was that by graduation we had a good possibility out there of some place to
Okay.
go. And the day before graduation, we got a call from a pastor in Toledo, Ohio.
Okay.
And we knew the youth pastor at that church.
Yeah.
But as soon as we hung up the phone, we both pulled out the map,
Yeah.
because it
Where
was
is
still only
Toledo?
maps.
Where exactly?
We were like,
Yeah.
where in the world is Toledo? All we knew
Yeah.
about Toledo was the Mud Hens from MASH.
Yeah.
You know, Jamie Farr, Klinger from MASH was from Toledo.
And Tony
Tony
Paco's Cafe, the hot dog cafe.
Okay. Yeah.
The character on MASH would have hot dogs and things sent to,
Yeah.
to Korea. Right?
Yeah, we knew
man.
his phrase "Holy Toledo" or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's all we knew about Toledo.
Yeah.
So we ended up going there that year for the next 2 years, and can't imagine ministry and life these 24 years since we left without that experience.
Okay.
That was everything we needed. They're still a partner church of ours. We still go back there every time we're in the States to speak for a week. They still bless us in so many ways.
Yeah.
So we're really
Just a tremendous experience.
it was everything we needed
Yeah.
for life as well as for future ministry.
It goes
Yeah.
to what you were saying about not rushing God's timetable, because we actually were appointed for the mission field in 98 after that painful ministry experience in Raleigh, but together decided that we would continue on with stateside ministry to experience some healing in our heart. And that's where the Lord chose to use as a space to bring healing to us. And if not for those friendships and relationships and supporters, we just truly, over these decades of ministry, we wouldn't be the same people.
Yeah. Could you imagine knowing what you know now, a quarter century of overseas missions work, going in without those 2 years, like you said, going in with all that hurt? Just would have been
really, really hard, because it wasn't only the hurt. I mean, the year at Columbia at seminary really helped with that. But those 2 years in Toledo were so affirming and confirming of God's calling and his gifting, that it would have been really hard without that.
Yeah.
Another big piece of that was it's where our daughter was born. And I had some pretty serious complications after her birth, the day after, that if I had been overseas, I likely would not have survived, because I barely survived being in a U.S. hospital with extremely great emergency care. That would have changed the whole trajectory of, Steve's life and our children. The Lord knew that. And so we see now, in retrospect, many reasons why the Lord put a bit of a pause or a detour or whatever we want to call it to have us remain in the U.S. for longer, because Steve really had it in his heart as an MK, as a missionary kid who was born on the mission field. He really had a heart and desire, and so did I, to have our children on the mission field. We thought that would be just a wonderful experience for our kids and for us as a family. And in the end, the Lord didn't grant that desire of our hearts. All three of our kids were born in the U.S., but now we see that for us, that was definitely God's timetable.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm impatient at times, and I think I've owned up to that already. I don't know. But if not, like, there's, from an outsider's perspective, and there's some people that are listening that maybe have a call on their life that hasn't come to fruition, and they're asking God, what is going on? From an outsider's perspective, like, you got that call. You grew up on the mission field. You got the call before you were double digit, age-wise. Why don't you just go? And hindsight and seeing what God was doing was so crucial before you guys then went. And so through all that process in 2000, did you say, I'm trying to remember yesterday, was it September, October? Okay, September of 2000 was when you guys went overseas for the first time. And talk through a little bit, we obviously don't have time for you to go through your 24 years of missions work, but talk through a little bit of the journey that God has taken you on in the different places and areas of ministry and missions. And then we'll get into what God has in store for you now.
Okay. Well, we've always just sought God for where he wants us to be and where we can be used the most. So even when we were appointed overseas, we told those making the decision back then, we want to go where you feel we can be used the most, where there's the greatest need. So as you know, we went to Russia. but they threw out this totally unexpected option of going to Argentina.
Okay.
They said, Russia or Argentina, you guys pray
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And because they knew my whole family history
Absolutely.
in Latin
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
But we were like, we've been thinking for years the Lord's leading us in this direction. Have a hard time seeing him change it over a weekend that we're allowed to pray about it before a decision's made.
Yeah.
So that's why we said Russia, and then we added to that, or where you guys feel we can be used, and where there's the greatest need.
Yeah.
So we ended up going to Russia for 4 terms overseas, and then just felt the Lord. It was getting more and more difficult to do ministry there, and we just on a home assignment year sensed the Lord changing our directions a bit.
Yeah.
This wasn't as I can't think of the word.
In Russian or English?
In
Yeah,
either
yeah.
language. In either
In
language.
either language, yeah.
Really, right now.
Yeah.
I mean, right now it would seem like a disputable decision or one that could lead to argument, but it wasn't 5 years ago. We ended up moving to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now that's a whole political thing and everything.
Yeah, like-
we didn't feel that way back then, and it wasn't a political decision, and it wasn't because we didn't want to be in Russia. We have hundreds and hundreds of friends there.
Yeah.
But we also saw things because of several trips a year that we used to take into Ukraine. We saw things God was doing there.
Yeah.
And a pastor that we knew well and wanted to
Yeah.
work with. And so we made that decision to move there in 2020.
The Lord was also giving me a new vision for ministry as well, which was a caregiving ministry
Okay.
for missionaries. And I did eventually, by the way, go back for my master's once our kids got a little bit older. And my undergraduate degree is in counseling psychology. My master's then I completed in clinical counseling. And I really had a heart to see us do a better job caring for missionaries who are really struggling. And our denomination at the time, our mission agency, was really beefing up our member care team. And I was part of that. And so one of the reasons that it was strategic for us to make that shift into Ukraine was because Americans can travel to Ukraine without a visa and can stay for a certain amount of
90
time
days,
without that. And that wasn't possible where we had been serving.
Yeah.
And I had a vision to open a counseling center where missionaries could come and stay and receive respite and care, and I could provide counseling for them while they were there. And so I opened
Instead of having to come all the way back to the States.
Right. I could
They're
meet
in
them
the region.
more regionally for
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
And hopefully meet them in that space and then have them rejoin their ministries in the region without it being so much of a disruption to their families and their ministries. And so I opened a counseling center there. Now, this was the height of COVID, so travel was really tricky back then, but things were really coming together. And I had this beautiful apartment that could host up to 6 people, so it could be a single worker or a couple or a family.
Yeah.
And I had a counseling office there. And that was a vision that the Lord had placed on my heart. And it became strategic for us to move there for that reason and to join some of the ministries that were happening there, along with this Ukrainian pastor and his family that we had known for years. So those were all the reasons that kind of drew us, and we could feel the Lord leading us that direction.
You forgot to mention that you also have your doctorate.
Yeah, and then at the
Before
end of
that.
at the end of our time leaving Russia and then into our move into Ukraine. Actually, I finished it before. Yeah, we moved to Ukraine.
Yeah.
I finished my doctorate, have a doctorate in psychology, and then became a licensed clinical psychologist in the U.S.
Okay.
And so I was using that degree in that space to try to help missionaries just be healthy and whole. And I'm still doing that today in my current roles and future role.
And so we will definitely get back to
Yeah,
that,
sure.
which is great. And so you guys have a tremendous ministry happening in Ukraine, and God is really at work, and you're not there anymore. So, like, how did God, like, kind of redirect that path?
Yeah. Well, obviously the war
Yeah.
happened, which cut our time there short.
Yeah.
We bought round trip tickets, to come back in a month,
Yeah.
thinking it's not going to be as widespread and countrywide as it is, and we know what's happened. So we didn't go back, and we just started praying. Lord, what do you have for us? We knew
Yeah.
we had a little over a year left in our term.
And just sorry to cut you off, but people that don't know, your terms are 5 years.
No,
4.
3 or 4.
Okay, 3 or 4.
That one
okay.
was going to be a 3. We
Okay.
have the options of.
Okay.
Yeah. Normal term is 4. Well, like 3 is a normal term now too. You have the options.
Yeah, you have the option between.
So most of our terms have been 4.
If you
This
count
one was 3.
the home assignment year in with the term, then I guess it could be 5. If you do 4 years on the field, you
And
do
then there's
1 year
1
back
year
in the U.S.
back. Okay,
Yeah.
so like
And
your
that's speaking in churches. through
yeah,
the
so
year.
your
Yeah.
time in Russia was 20 years, including home.
Including home assignment.
Home
Yeah.
assignment,
So that was
okay.
4 terms.
Yeah,
But then including home assignment.
including
Yeah,
home
that's right.
assignment. Okay,
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then so you have a year left.
We have a year left. We're praying.
Yeah.
We're not sure exactly what the next steps are. There were different options out there about what to do, and we were asked a few months later, after returning back to the States, about going to Germany for what they just called a special assignment for our final year, or however long it ended up to be, until the end of our term, because of Ukrainian refugees that had ended up in this small town north of Berlin, where our missions agency had some missionary couples,
Okay,
as well as a small church plant. And of course, none of the missionaries or the Germans spoke Russian or Ukrainian.
yeah,
And none of the Ukrainians spoke German or English.
German or English. Yeah,
And we're in the States praying about, okay, Lord, what do you have for us for this last year? So it just really seemed like a good fit. And so we
Yeah.
moved there. It ended up being 9 months by the time we got going.
okay,
So we returned in May of 2023. And it was just a wonderful time. We can't imagine a better place to settle for like a 9-month period of time
Yeah.
with people that you don't know at all.
yeah,
And we're the old guys on the team too.
yeah,
And we thought, okay, how's this going to go? Are they going to accept us? Are they going to feel like we're the old fogies or whatever?
yeah.
And they were so genuine in how they accepted us and welcomed us, and were constantly, that might be an exaggeration, but regularly either knocking on our door or sending texts
Yeah.
or calling on the phone to just say, hey, we got this issue, or, how would you handle this or that? It was really great.
One of the
Yeah.
things we didn't cover was in the 20 years of our first 20 years of our missions work, we were involved in church planting. We were involved in reaching migrant workers. We were involved in field leadership. I served for a time as the field administrator. Steve served
Okay.
for a time as the field director. And we had grown in our roles from, church ministry and various outreach types of ministries into leadership positions,
Yeah.
into a caregiving role for workers. So for a while we were an authority, but then we felt more our passion was to come alongside workers, to coach them and mentor them and help them cast vision and be healthy working in team with one another. And this is our sweet spot. And so we kind of
Yeah.
worked into that kind of space in our missions work, so that by the time we got to Germany, we were really seen as, wow, we're so glad you're here. You can really assist us.
Yeah.
And they embraced us that way. And it was such a beautiful thing. We just felt like a lot of the gifts and passions and experiences that we had kind of came to a culmination there. We still got to use our Russian language and a lot of the cultural understanding and knowledge we had, but to come alongside a couple young families who were in their first terms on their field, and they were planting a church,
And
and
they're
we
doing a
could,
great job,
and
yeah.
they're doing
Yeah.
a great job, and we could say to them, we're your cheerleaders,
Yeah.
we're here to help however we can. And they just loved that. And so we kind of became the parents, like on
Yeah.
the team, or the grandpas and grandma and
Yeah.
grandpa on the team.
One thing that she alluded to that we hadn't mentioned yet is our last 5 years, up until this past June or July, we've served also in what's called a team developer role. So
Okay.
we're working with teams and especially with the team leaders throughout that part of the world and in 5 or 6 countries, just helping them for team health, for vision, for strategy, all that kind of stuff.
Our roles had really grown to be more regional,
Yeah.
as well as just focused on one particular country.
Okay.
And we loved that too.
Yeah, and so it is amazing. You guys talked about it earlier of how God directed your path all the way through, preparing you. And so now God has led you to a different mission organization through time of prayer and seeking Him, and everything with your previous position ended well. It's not like there was a fallout or, nothing was bad, but God just led you in a different direction. And so speak about it's Inkalink, correct? So speak about Inkalink and what your roles, to no surprise, are going to be after hearing a little more of your story, and just where God's leading you moving forward.
Yeah, Inca Link was founded by our friends Rich and Lisa Brown, who are missionaries. They're both missionary kids from South America.
Yeah.
It was founded 18 years ago.
Okay.
And their vision is to reach the 300 million youth of Latin America with Christ's irresistible love.
Yeah.
So they're in 7 Latin American countries now. And their ministries are all geared towards youth, at-risk youth. So a lot of education, a lot of sports, a lot of Bible studies, those things. And then through that, they also are able to reach families, parents, older siblings. So they had asked us to be involved if we decided we were staying stateside. They wanted us to consider joining them. And so we did a lot of praying about it. I don't know if you want to share what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, so as their organization has grown to kind of a mission agency of its own, it was birthed out of the denomination we had been serving with, because they, Rich and Lisa Brown, are missionaries with that same organization, but they started a nonprofit to reach the youth of Latin America, and that nonprofit has grown to having 35 of their own missionaries who are Americans who live in Latin America now, serving in those ministries across those 7 different countries. They have 13 stateside staff, and they have some 120 Latin American missionaries serving with them down in Latin America in those ministries. And as they've grown, one of the places that they've seen a need is caring for their missionaries, because some of these places where they're ministering are hard places. They're riddled with poverty and crime and drug presence and things like that, where some of the ministries and places that they're located can be dangerous places. As well as the typical challenges that any missionary would face, being away from family and a network of support and learning another language and culture. And so they approached us and said, we really, as we are growing, we really have a need in this area. We would love to see Steve be director of pastoral care and shepherding of our workers. And we would love to have you be the director of member care with your counseling background and education in that. And knowing that we both were passionate about that, and we had already been doing it in the mission agency that we were working in, which, by the way, we have ongoing wonderful relationship with. And so it just felt like a marriage of a lot of really good things together. And allowed us to remain stateside, which was one of the things that we felt, we don't totally understand it, but we felt pretty clearly that the Lord was leading us in for this season, for whatever reason that is. And this way we can make trips down to Latin America. We can still be traveling. I'm still traveling with my role with our other denomination, the Christian and Missionary Alliance, providing member care for their workers as well. So it's just really the best of both worlds for us, or the best of the whole world for us.
Now, I was going to say, obviously, very much you guys are staying stateside compared to your first 24 years. But you guys are going to be on trips almost monthly, if not multiple times a month, correct?
For me, it's
for
averaging
you,
that.
She's
Averaging
averaging
that,
at
okay.
least this year because
Yeah.
of additional trips with the Alliance. She has a lot of additional. We don't know if that will be a yearly thing for her.
Okay, or it might
But,
be,
yeah.
up and down in number.
We know we'll be in Latin America a lot of this summer.
Yes.
Our first trip is to Peru in March. So yeah, we'll be doing
Yeah, so
a good
lot of
amount, which
travel.
we enjoy.
Yeah.
We enjoy that part. That was
Yeah.
one of the sadnesses when we stepped down from our roles, overseas roles this past summer, and thought I'm going to be in a church somewhere.
yeah.
And we wanted to stay involved in missions, but we thought we're not going to be traveling nearly as much.
Yeah.
We're so accustomed to
Yeah.
it. And
Missions is really our heartbeat.
Yeah.
So we were having a very hard time wrapping our brains around
Yeah.
what would that look like if we're in stateside ministry, and how can missions still be a part of our lives? We had already been thinking about ways, we could be a pastoral care couple for a particular mission field so that we could have that partnership and go, maybe a couple times a year, or definitely involved in short-term missions trips. So if he's a pastor, we'll lead missions trips.
Yeah.
We were
Yeah,
already
yeah.
thinking strategically about how we could keep missions as an active part of our lives. But this way, we're still actually vocationally involved in missions.
Yeah.
And we'll be always on the move. Yeah.
Yeah, and so God really, and like you said, God has prepared you for this. There's some other roles that, depending on your capacity, that you spoke about yesterday at lunch. That there's also this, and there's also this, and you guys have both talked about how you like using your time to do work.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing now hearing a little more of your guys' story to be like, oh, well, of course you might be involved in this and this and that, with this organization because of what you've done and what God has given you experience in. And so it does seem like it's, just God has orchestrated the steps to get you guys involved with Inkalink, and the beauty of that and what that looks like will be tremendous. And so it's exciting.
It is.
And it's also at like this far into your ministry, it's like, oh, we're also kind of starting something new,
We are.
yeah, it's been a big transition.
Yeah.
We've been doing this over here for so many years.
Yeah.
And you just get comfortable with the known, right?
Yeah.
And so we knew God, after a year of prayer, we knew God is calling us to do something different. So that's the first big step,
Yeah.
is making that decision. And then, okay, what's this going to be? What's
Yeah.
the ministry going to be? Where's it going to be? Where are we going to live? Are we going to get paid, or are we going to have to raise
Yeah.
our funds
Yeah.
like we're doing for the first
Yes.
time really ever?
Yeah.
Those are big steps, and we're in the second half of our careers, not in the first half. So most times people at this age maybe are starting to glide a bit because they're like, I don't want to make any big changes, especially with my retirement accounts.
You look at the finish line at this
Yes.
point sometimes,
Yeah.
and
So there's been a few times in the last few months that we've been like, crud, what did
have
we
we
do?
I know.
done?
Yeah.
Did we make a mistake and just have to go back? I always have to go back to, okay, the Lord led us. And anytime we woke up with anxiety through these last months of like, oh no, we're not getting paid until we get, the full 100% or whatever.
Yeah.
He would just
The Lord
come through.
always confirmed, like that day
Yeah.
or the next, we'd get a check in the mail from somebody.
Yeah.
Or somebody would email and say, we want to support you, and we're sending money to Inkalink.
Yeah.
He's done it every single time. Mm-hmm. So that's just a confirmation to us that we're following his leading.
Yeah. And again, it's also, hopefully those that are listening are getting this as well, but it's also a reminder of God's timing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like, for whatever reason, there's this space in between. And it's not like it's been years. It's been a couple months, or a few months, but there's this space in between that God has for you guys to prepare the way so that, his timing will be perfect. and it's good to have goals, and it's good to, because you mentioned yesterday, like, I was hoping November 1st it'd be fully done, and and November 1st isn't here yet.
That's right. That's right.
And so
we have a few days.
But it looks like it might not be, and so, and it's like, but he's been faithful the whole way through,
very much so.
and reminded you of, for whatever reason, hey, just continue to trust my timing's perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
he gives blessings and gifts along the way too that are even extras. Like, for example, this calling that he's placed on us really in many ways brings Steve full circle in his life. He's
Absolutely.
coming back to ministry in Latin America,
Yeah.
which we kind of joke that we were the black sheep of the family, that, the
7 family members in Latin
Yeah,
America,
I
and
know.
then we go to Eastern Europe.
Yeah. And now
you were the one that ran from Latin America.
yeah, like the prodigal child has
Yes,
returned,
yes.
like back to Latin America. And so that's just a sweet thing. We had fairly decent conversational Spanish before we learned Russian. So when they floated the idea of Argentina to us all those years ago, it could have been maybe the easier choice for us to do. It was
It
ministry
would
to
have been a hard ministry.
yeah, it was
But-
ministry to upper class people.
Yeah.
There were schooling options for our children. We already had a working knowledge of Spanish, but we felt the Lord leading
Yeah.
us that way. And now when we look at this whole picture, it's as if God is saying, I always had something special though for you in Latin America
Yeah,
as well.
it just
but
wasn't-
the timing
yeah.
wasn't then.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
that's a sweet extra gift when I look
Absolutely.
at this.
Kind of feel also that he's just rebuilding our trust in him. What we've been doing over the last 24 years. I mean, there were a lot of hard times,
Yeah.
a lot of difficult times. But we were there for so many years, especially the Russia piece, that we knew what to expect, even if it was going to
Yeah.
be hard.
Yeah.
Now we're launching out into something completely new.
Yeah.
As far as the new ministry, as far as having to raise 100% of our funds,
Yeah.
all of that at this age, and I think it's almost like he's telling us, like, do you trust me? He's asking,
Yeah.
do you trust me? Okay, you trusted me before, but you kind of knew what was coming.
Yeah.
Now you don't know what to expect. And you don't know the culture, and you don't really remember much of the language.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and you don't know how to fundraise. Do you trust me that I'm going to come through?
Because
Yeah.
it came to this point where truly, after 24 years of overseas ministry, when we felt the Lord prompting our hearts to possibly remain stateside, actually, that was the harder thing to do, to consider, wait, living in
Yeah.
the U.S. after
Yeah.
all of these years of not living here, that was out of our comfort zone. Now, the comfort zone was moving back overseas. It's what we have been doing for nearly a quarter of a century.
And it would have
Yeah.
been to a new place again, but still, it's
yeah,
still
but
heading
it's
back overseas,
kind of
which
what
we know.
Yeah.
we've known. It's a lifestyle and a rhythm of life that we've had for a long time now. And so this idea of remaining stateside was actually stepping out of our comfort zone to consider.
Yeah, and as nerve-wracking as it is to move overseas to somewhere new, been there, done that.
Yes,
multiple
many
times.
times.
So it's not like it wouldn't be nerve-wracking, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
what you hadn't done in so long is remain stateside.
Yeah.
Like you said,
That's right.
and so it is neat, and I think a lot of times it's unintentional. But when we move and trust God fully to move into a situation where he has to show up or you won't survive, there's self-reliance that can creep in after a
Yeah,
time.
sure.
So it's only natural,
Yep.
but how beautiful, like you said, that in this season, maybe he's pointing out some of that and being like, no, you need to trust in me fully.
Yeah, that's right.
And so your age doesn't matter. It's because you guys aren't old. Oldest relatives.
Thank you.
The older I get, like it's like, man, I vividly remember my parents being this age and being like, man, you are really old. And I'm like, I don't feel that old yet. But like a call won't change just because you've gotten a little older.
Yeah.
God doesn't guarantee that. Now, a lot of times he calls us to remain in the race and finish the race and whatever the calling is. And there's beauty in that to stay the long term. But if he changes the call, then he'll, just trust him in that.
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful reminder. Really quick to wrap things up. One of my hopes out of this is that people can be encouraged no matter what, as followers of Christ, in the reoccurring themes, so to speak, of your story, in that trusting God has been crucial through all of it. He has always been faithful. God's timing is his timing, and we can't rush it. We have to be patient. And my dad always says, let time be your friend, not your enemy, But for those that maybe are truly feeling the Holy Spirit prompt them into missions, what are some things that you would suggest to someone that maybe is like, I don't even know what to do next?
Yeah.
Like, what do I even look for? Like, what would you suggest? And I know that that's a hard question because these people could be at various stages of their life.
Sure.
Or like one of our other friends that was here, Holly, she got called into missions, and she's like, wait a second, what's going on? And she was established. She was a mom, she, a professional, and, she was later on in life. And it's like, man, what do I do? That's going to be very different than like maybe a teenager who's being called into missions. But what would you guys suggest for someone that's listening and feels like, what would be the next step for me? Because I think God is possibly calling and pointing me in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if they're already involved in a local church body, one of the first things to do is talk with a pastor about it, or a leader in the church, maybe a Sunday school teacher or someone like that. Let your church fellowship know about the call that God has prompted your heart in, because you're going to need that support network.
Yeah.
And so, and then sometimes just very naturally out of a local church body, there'll be connections to a particular mission agency, a sending agency that would help them come alongside a young person or a person who's maybe already in a career, a first career, who's interested in missions, to walk them through the process of preparation for the mission field. Like we've already mentioned, we served with the Christian Missionary Alliance. They have a great website, Called to Serve, and they can go on there and walk through a process. But as an individual, personally, what really needs to be happening is constant prayer and communication with the Lord, hearing from His Holy Spirit and how God is leading. That may be to some further education. It might be to be involved in a ministry, lay ministry or career ministry, maybe right away. Everybody's story is just so different, but you should be actively involved in your local church body. If God is calling you into any kind of ministry, it starts first where you're planted, where you're rooted in your local body. And so that's why those conversations and beginning ministries and support needs to happen in that space, I think, first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say go on inkalink.org.
Okay.
And also look,
Absolutely.
Yeah, short-term.
Shameless plug.
Yeah,
No, that's
short-term
great.
missions.
I think
Yes.
a short-term, taking a short-term trip if they've never gone is a good way to start. That just gets your feet wet, gives you a little bit of understanding of a foreign culture.
Yeah.
You don't have to go. For the first 200 years of missions or more, missionaries didn't go on short-term mission trips. They went to the field like my parents. For the first time. Or like my mom, at least, had never been there. So that's not a necessity, but it helps.
Yeah.
And like Christy said, I think it's vital that you're involved in ministry here in the States, in your local church, if sharing your faith, whatever.
If you're not doing it here, you're not probably going to do it over there.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you have to be preaching in church.
No, but yes, I was going to say the involvement should be there.
Yeah, because it's not going to happen over there if you're not doing it here.
Yeah.
And I would say just continue to pray about it, and as well as putting out feelers to your, the different missions agencies that you're interested in. Considering your education, do you have any type of post-high school education? Because most missionaries, when they get there to the field, if they don't have anything after high school, maybe after college, they often realize in their first few years on the mission field, I need more.
Yeah.
And it's possible now to do it pretty easily from the mission field, but it also
Absolutely.
takes away from ministry, right?
Yes.
So situations are different from everybody,
Mm-hmm.
or between people. So
Yeah.
I would say prayerfully consider that. What does further education look like, or just further training?
Yeah.
And I would, one thing I often, it sounds kind of harsh, but one thing I often tell people is don't let the American dream suck you in.
Ooh.
Because how many
Yeah.
people have we known that say we're called to missions, even get bachelor's degrees in
Yeah.
missions, and don't end up on the mission field, and sometimes not even in ministry. Now, maybe God really hadn't called them. So that's
Very much so.
something you have to test.
But yes.
But the American way of life can suck you in
Yeah.
because it's really comfortable, and living overseas isn't really comfortable in a foreign culture. But if that's what God's called you to do, then
Yeah.
you want to obey Him.
Yeah. And we, like that's such a good reminder of also that we're not called to comfort.
Yeah.
Like and it doesn't mean that God's calling won't ever be comfortable. It doesn't mean that like there won't be seasons of that and beautiful things in other ways. But I talk about often I need to be careful to not allow my illegitimate child to come in, which is the child between the American dream and the gospel of the Bible. And I think it's the true gospel, and it's not.
Yeah.
Because it's seeking after both and what does God say about it? It's just me,
Yeah.
and so often, even someone that, not that I feel called to overseas missions at all, in the sense of full-time vocational, very involved in missions and short-term trips, but it's still, that's something that we need to not be sucked in, even if we're staying,
right.
but it's a great
Yeah.
reminder.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. Very much appreciate hearing more of your
Thanks for
story.
having us.
I always love knowing the background of things and knowing people's story. And I'm excited to see where we go moving forward as a church and potentially partnering and what that looks like moving forward. No matter what, so appreciate your guys' answering the call of global missions and what you've done so far, and continue to keep that up. Those that are listening, we also want to encourage you to be in prayer for Steve and Christy as God's leading them. And if you want to know more information, feel free to reach out to the church and we can connect you guys. And it is that is something I would also very much encourage anyone listening. Just because God's not calling you to go overseas necessarily, He is calling you to be involved in global missions in some aspect.
Absolutely.
That is for every follower of Christ.
That's right.
And so praying for those that are, supporting them in other ways. So we want to encourage that involvement.
Yeah, thank you.
Very much so moving forward. So
We felt that strongly from this church. The heart of missions here
Yeah,
is such a blessing to us.
yeah, it really is. And I'm blessed because growing up in this church, I just assumed that was because it was my only experience in church. I just thought every church was like, every church had missionaries come in not
not
on a
really.
regular basis. And like, that's just the more I grow up, the more I realize that's not necessarily the case.
That's right.
There's so many churches that are doing an amazing job
Yes.
in global missions, but
Some miss that blessing.
Yeah,
Because we
and
are
it-
all part of the Great Commission.
yes, and it truly is a blessing. And we are very blessed as a staff here to have a church that's part of their heartbeat.
Yeah, it is a
It's
huge
apparent.
blessing.
So,
It's
yeah.
very apparent.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys again. And thank you for everyone listening to the Federated Squared Circle, Wrestling with God's Word. We encourage you to continue to seek God in whatever it is that He is calling you to, and continue to seek Him if that call is possibly going to change. Too often we get comfortable where we're at, and we forget to ask the question if the call is changing. So we encourage you to do so. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.